Hello, my name is Sasha Rosenbaum, and I'm a co-founder of a startup called Ergonautic, which roughly translates to navigating work. At Ergonautic, our mission is to help people in IT work better. So let's talk about making DevOps valuable. One of the things that we've noticed across the industry is that a lot of people have started various kinds of DevOps transformations, but we're not so sure that everyone has been able to realize all the benefits of that transformation that they were hoping to achieve. So in my talks, I usually like to start with a little bit of history. So let's talk about where we all started with this. So once upon a time, IT really often looked like this. So there was a development department and there was an operations department, and there was basically a ticketing system. So developers threw support tickets at operations threw tickets back at developers. And because of all of this, there was a wall of confusion between the two. And these two departments never seemed to align. And we used to really think that there is a contradiction between speed and reliability. So we said our developers want to move fast and deliver new features, and our ops people want to move slow so that they don't break things. So we associated change with breaking things, and we thought that reliability can only be achieved by making change very slowly and not very often. Okay. And then around 2007 or 8, some conversations started. Some of them included one of my co-founders, Andrew Clay Schaefer, who some folks credit with the invention of the word DevOps, which he denies, but he does happen to be the first person who ever tweeted the word DevOps. So he's definitely a contributing factor to all of us being here. People started having conversations about the fact that developers and operations should really work together towards a common goal, and we're not so different. And really our goal is to deliver software. And so in 2009, the first DevOps Days ever happened in Ghent. The other person on this slide is Patrick Dubois, who with some other folks started this first conference. And he's the person we got to credit with kind of starting the DevOps movement, right? Around the same time, this book came out. I think Dave Farley is actually speaking at this conference as well. So Continuous Delivery book, in my opinion, was like a foundational book on anything related to DevOps and continuous integration, continuous delivery. It came out in 2010. And back in the day, actually, when you told people that you could achieve continuous delivery, they told you you could not. At the very least, when you proved to them that you could do it, they told you their organization could not. They told you that they were too large or too small or had too much legacy or were too new. Whatever the excuse was, nobody thought you could push to production every day. It was just considered completely impossible. DevOps Days grew from one conference to, this slide follows it to 2019. It obviously slowed down a little bit during the pandemic, and it continues growing today. But basically it grew to a global organization of volunteer-led events, thanks in large part to Bridget Cromout, who helped drive this movement forward, and a lot of other people who were volunteer organizers in every different city. This basically helped popularize the idea, and also we have always exchanged a lot of ideas at the DevOps Days events about how we could make world in IT better and make collaboration between developers and operations better. And you can see that coinciding with this DevOps movement thing, we also see that DevOps Google search trend continues to rise. So in 2009, no one knew what DevOps was. Today, a lot more people know what DevOps is. And it's interesting because I did comparative search with tacos, and so we definitely lose to tacos a lot. So definitely not as popular. And then I believe it started in 2014. The State of DevOps report came out, led by Nicole Forsgren and a number of other people in collaboration with Puppet. Basically, there was 4 key metrics that we tracked in the State of DevOps report. And one of the key things that it demonstrated is that you could actually move faster and have less errors and take less time to recover from these errors, right? So speed and reliability were really not a contradiction. We used to have a kind of an incorrect intuition about this. And so the data from State of DevOps report basically showed the folks that move faster actually are better performers and have 7 times lower change failure rate. Again, this is from 2019. I believe Nathan Harvey is actually at this conference giving a talk right before me about the State of DevOps report for the current year. So, our intuition used to be that speed and reliability contradict each other, but they actually don't. And so software delivery is sort of like a muscle, right? The more you train it, the better you get at software delivery. And it makes sense. Like the more you deploy, the less errors you make during deployment, the more you operationalize this procedure, the more painless it gets, right? And the other metaphor I like to use for this is basically, if you think of a bicycle, if you're going on a bicycle, if you slow down too much, you lose your balance, right? You won't be able to maintain balance if you're going too slow. There's also a limit to how fast you can go while maintaining control, but it definitely helps to be at least at a certain level of speed to be able to maintain balance. Now, of course, because of all of this movement and because of all of these conversations and because of a lot of grassroots movements that were coming from IT, CIOs also got the message. And so around maybe 2010 to 2014, every CIO, CTO, CEO in the industry got the message that they got to transform their business. So if I look for conversations of executives for the last about decade or even a decade and a half, is transforming towards agile, DevOps, cloud, platform engineering, SRE. The words change, but the continuous transformation remains there. And we never stop to ask if we've achieved our goals. So we continue to the next transformation. Also, a lot of times what we do is we just rename things, right? So I talk to organizations quite frequently that they renamed some team from basically support to operations to DevOps to SRE to maybe now platform engineering, and they actually never change how people work. So the terms keep changing, maybe some of the rituals change, but actually no change happens. The other thing that happened that is like a little bit better than just renaming things, but maybe not necessarily the greatest, is the mandate to just move faster, right? Because we like to simplify things. So we said, okay, we just want to move faster. Our measure is code deploy. Let's deploy code more frequently, right? And I have a secret for you. You cannot actually have CI/CD without testing. And testing here can be any kind of quality assurance. So anything, availability, reliability, security, accessibility, whatever ability is important to your organization. If you don't have control for the quality, if you don't have any gates or tests or automated procedures to verify that you have quality on all of these aspects, you can't actually implement CI/CD. So what happens a lot now is we have the tools to deploy to production every day, and a lot of organizations implement the procedure to deploy to production every day without attaching any kind of quality control to it. And so basically what happens is you deliver bugs to production really fast, right? And usually this makes people backtrack and say that this isn't working, we need to slow down, or move to the next transformation and rename things to the next thing, thinking that, implementing infrastructure as code is going to save everything, or whatever it is, right? So did we get it wrong from the beginning? Like, were we kind of wrong in the foundations of what DevOps was? I don't think we were. So if you were around the DevOps circles for long enough, we often framed it as this acronym CALMS. And so CALMS stands for Culture, Automation, Lean, Measurement, and Sharing. And my claim is if we had all of these things and we paid attention to all of these things, we would actually be just fine. But unfortunately, we basically focused on only 2 of them and almost only on 1 of them. So what happened is we focused on culture a lot in a sense that we talked about culture. right? So because it was a grassroots movement, because it came from down to up, right? And we talk about collaboration a lot. What happens is you start with high excitement for collaboration, but don't necessarily continue. And then what happened even more than that is we focused on automation to the exclusion of everything else, right? Because it's quote unquote easy. You just like automate things, you put more tools in place, right? If you naively Google DevOps today, it will be all about tools. So culture is an interesting one. We could talk about it a lot, but so there is a sense in culture that you need to motivate people, or rather, I like BJ Fogg and the work he's done, basically do motivation matching. So you need to help people do what they already want to do. Now, in terms of DevOps, it's actually easy to motivate people to DevOps because like nobody wants to be on call during the weekend more than they have to, right? And nobody wants to communicate via tickets when they could actually talk to each other. And nobody wants toil when they don't have to do toil, right? So the motivation part is actually somewhat easy. But there's the model that basically was developed by Edgar Schein, and this has been known in organizational research for a while now. So the old model used to say that to change behavior, you have to change thinking, right? You start with convincing people that something is a good idea, and then it will lead to change in behavior. Schein's model actually says that to change behavior, you need to change behavior. You start with changing behavior, and you start with making the change in behavior easy, and that changes the way people think. Right? So, quote here from an essay reviewing the model is, anyone wanting to change a culture needs to define the actions and behaviors they desire, then design the work processes that are necessary to reinforce these behaviors. So you start with the behavior that you want to change. You make it easy to do the right thing. And then people will learn that the right thing actually works and makes their life better. Therefore, that change in behavior will actually change their thinking. So as we said, 10 years ago, we could barely convince people that continuous delivery was even possible. And now everybody believes you could do it, and everybody believes it's a good thing. They just often don't know how to get there. The automation part is also easy to get wrong. So I'm a big fan of automation. My bio on Twitter used to say, automate all things, respect all humans. I don't have a screenshot of the bio, but I have a screenshot of someone's tweet about it. I do believe that everything that can be automated should be automated, but this isn't as easy as it sounds. And so I will list a few problems with automation, not because it's evil, but because those are things we need to think about when we automate processes. So one of the problems is automation drift, so mandatory escape. Right? You think that when you implement automation to a process, you're going to free up time once the automation takes over. In reality, what happens is you're going to maintain the automation forever. So you actually are losing the time you had to do the original task, and now you're investing in automation maintenance. Automation drift is a real thing because we change processes often. So every time we change a process, we actually have to change the automation that was automating that process, right? And that is something to consider. Once you implement automation, someone needs to be responsible for maintaining it. The second thing is, I'm just going to read these tweets. This is from Rain saying, I mean, yes, automation eliminates human errors in the sense that those errors will now be performed by machines. And then the response to it is, automation, how to make mistakes consistently, repeatedly, and really fast. So we have multiple examples of people taking out an entire data center or a region in a cloud with a single line of code. Without automation, it would not be possible, but with automation, we made it possible. That is, again, not to say that automation is evil or that humans should not be trusted. It is just the reality that when you implement automation, you need to be cautious about what you're doing. The other one, and I should have a better example of this because it happens all the time in reality, but calcifying bad processes is a bad idea. So if you have a process in an organization that is really brittle, that relies on making multiple changes and getting buy-in from multiple departments, and if you try to automate this process, it's not going to get better. And in some cases, it will get worse because now it is sort of the thing that must happen and you don't have any choice about it. So before you automate a process, you need to ask, is it the best way we can do this? And then last but not least, probably my favorite is all systems are sociotechnical, meaning they're comprised of humans and machines. And so you cannot take the humans out of the loop, right? And so our naive tendency is to think that human error is the problem. Therefore, if we take the humans out, then everything will be great. But in reality, the second law of thermodynamics says entropy always wins. Entropy means that any system left to its own devices will strive towards chaos. And if you think about it, it does make sense to you, right? If you don't maintain your house, it will fall apart, even though no humans were there. So in the same way, any IT system left to its own devices, no matter how good the automation is, will fall apart over time. Therefore, you always need humans to contribute to that maintenance and upkeep and upgrade and enhancement, right? And no system can be just completely automated. So we talked about the things that we did and the problems with it a little bit, but let's talk about the forgotten pillar. I don't have time in this talk to talk about all of the common aspects, but I'm going to talk a lot about measurement. Measurement is extremely crucial and important because if you're not measuring things, you actually don't know how you're doing. And that's a problem with a lot of transformations is there's actually no metric set in terms of being able to tell, are we doing better or are we doing worse? I'm going to quote Edward Deming. The aim of the system must be clear to everyone in the system. Without an aim, there is no system. The aim is a value judgment. So the aim of the system is value, right? So what you actually want to be driving towards is value. You want to measure value. So in a way, anything else is just a proxy, right? So how fast I'm deploying code doesn't matter. It matters if my users are seeing value out of my code, out of my application, out of my system. The problem is that measuring value is very hard. It's not easy to figure out how to measure value effectively. So instead, we get this mandate of just measuring things. So like in the organizations that I see in the industry, there's kind of one of two things that happens frequently. So one is no one measures anything, right? So no one looks at any metrics. Potentially metrics exist, but people don't look at them, or no metrics exist whatsoever. The second option is there's a lot of metrics. There's a lot of dashboards. There's a lot of data. No one knows how to make sense of it. There's a ton of monitoring tools. These dashboards are usually good at investigating an incident. They're usually good at looking at logs. They're usually good at solving a particular problem. Sometimes they're pretty good at identifying trends even, but they usually don't give you any information about the value you're delivering to your users. And it's very rare that I see in our industry that someone is actually thinking about the value they're delivering and attempting to design metrics based on value. So metrics issues in naive implementation is that they're subjective, right? Anything that you define is always going to be subjective. Also, we often don't have proper definitions of things. So people immediately start gaming metrics. The other thing is they are imbalanced. So if you focus on one thing to the exclusion of other things, you are going to get a lopsided effect and you're going to get more of one thing that is usually causing problems. And then metrics are only a proxy, right? And so your metrics are only as good as your proxy is. So let's give an example for this. This is probably my least favorite metric that people use in IT. This is velocity. So how many story points you got delivered. So usually when agile coaches or such come in, they start measuring velocity and they start looking at how many points were delivered. In fact, they do tell you to break stories apart more so you can deliver more. So usually they can show that the velocity of the team increased over time. The problem is usually it is correlated with story point inflation. So subjectively, we didn't do anything actually. We just gave them metric. We said we're delivering more, but in reality, we're just breaking down stories to be smaller, which could be good or bad, but this isn't actually speeding things up. Imbalance part is if we actually increase speed, if we actually increase velocity, did we do it to the exclusion of quality, right? Did we stop focusing on quality assurance to get faster? And then only a proxy is usually no one asks how much value we delivered. So we delivered 20 stories this sprint. Everybody gets a pat on the back. Did we actually deliver value to customers? usually no one asks this question. There's multiple laws regarding this, but this is Goodhart's law from Sketchplanations, which are amazing sketches on some topics. So when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So an example for this, if you measure people on number of nails made, then you might get 1,000 tiny nails. If you measure people on the weight of nails made, you might get a few giant heavy nails. Are you actually delivering value? In both cases, no. And this shows both that metrics get gained and that metrics need to be in balance, right? So if you actually measure both of these things, you would get a better result than just one of them. So what you actually want is a balanced system of metrics, right? So you actually want to put metrics in balance with each other. So at Ergonautic, we often use this chart to kind of exemplify. So in terms of delivering work, these are pretty good things to start from. So if you look at quality, responsiveness, throughput, and predictability and leverage together, you will get an overall picture of how you're doing. But if you say focus only on quality metrics and don't focus on anything else, you're likely to lower your throughput and lower your responsiveness. If you focus only on throughput, you're likely to lower quality, right? And so it's easy to see that predictability and responsiveness, for instance, are on opposite side of the aisle. You can say, oh, my customers are so evil, they keep changing their mind about what they want, and that ruins my predictability. And that is if you're over-focused on predictability. But in reality, maybe you want responsiveness, right? So you want all of these things, and you want them to counterbalance each other so that you know that in overall sense, you are doing good as a system. Now, these are top level things that I'm not diving into here in any kind of depth, but basically you also break them down into smaller things and say, what does quality mean to me? What does throughput mean to me? So I'm going to bring up a few things from the Site Reliability Engineering book by Google, the original one. There's a number of good things in there. Interestingly, one of the definitions of SRE in the Google book is that it is Google's implementation of DevOps. Now, not everyone is Google, and not everything in Google SRE book is the same as it was 5 years ago. I believe it was first published. But there's a lot of good ideas, and I think it gets us to the point where we have sort of common language about metrics of what DevOps could potentially be measured on. So there's the notion of 4 golden signals from SRE book. So these are latency, traffic, errors, and saturation. So the first thing that Google actually noticed and did a study on is that latency is tremendously crucial to user satisfaction. So like if your latency exceeds, say, 2-3 seconds, I don't know if that number has changed over time with user expectations, but definitely after 3 seconds, people abandon your website. At the very least, they reload, and at most, they just go somewhere else. So one of the things they said is, okay, we have to focus on making the latency below the threshold at which people abandon our website. Or you can also set a bar higher and say, I want it to be faster than my competitor and stuff like that. Right? So these metrics are pretty good in terms of being closer to the user experience. So if you have too high a latency, your users probably having a bad experience. If you have too many errors, your users probably have a bad experience. Any of these 4 metrics will give you a relatively objective picture of your system, and any of these metrics are basically closer to the user. However, what is interesting about them, these are really good system metrics. They're still not necessarily a great proxy for value. If your page is Google search and everybody knows exactly what the value is, then the latency of how fast the page loads and how fast the page loads results is actually a really good proxy for value. But you can also serve a completely useless page very, very quickly, right? So you want to know that you're delivering value. So these are very good to start from and to focus on potentially, but not to the exclusion of some proxy of user value necessarily. So let's come back to talking about the true goal. Again, I'm going to come back to Damien. The aim of the system is to deliver value. And the other thing that he says is important is it should be clear to everyone in the system. It's not like the CEO knows what the value is and the developer does not, right? When you ask people what they're doing and why they're doing it, they should actually know the answer to that. We want to come closer, as close as we can, to measuring the flow of value through the system. Right? So I think a good place to start is looking at SLAs, SLIs, and SLOs. So these were also popularized by the Google SRE book, and I think they get us very far in terms of ability to define metrics that are relevant to our space. So SLA is familiar to everybody. Every service provider has had an SLA for the last number of decades. This is financially backed availability. So the number of nines you promise your customers. Now, SLO can be defined as targeted availability. And usually what happens is people look at availability, but availability is not exactly what you want to look at. So it is the minimum, but it isn't the goal. So availability versus reliability, availability says, is my service up and running? Which is important. I've talked to organizations that don't even have a pingdom attached to their application. They really don't know if their service is up. But what happens is usually people start talking in the number of nines, and they usually want 5 nines. By the way, that's 526 minutes of downtime a year. So that means that someone needs to be really good at running your system through maintenance, through updates, through anything. Also, my favorite thing here to say is will your users even notice that your system is up this much? And if you're on the internet, they will not, because the internet service provider error rate is somewhere between 0.1% and 1%, which puts you in the 4.9 rate. So you will be doing all this work for nothing because your users will still get a 4.9s. The other important question here is, will your users care about you having 5.9s? And the answer to that is, not if your system is buggy. Your users care about their experience, their ability to accomplish their goals, not how many nines the service has. I mean, there's a minimum number of nines you need to have in the current world. Reliability is a question of, is my service doing what the users expect it to do? What makes this definition hard is that you actually have to define what the users expect your service to do, right? And that is surprisingly difficult for organizations. So SLO, service level objective, is targeted reliability. So we want to define SLOs to be our best proxies of user value. Now, I want to step back, and I usually have a little bit more explanations about SLIs, SLOs in my talks, but the SLA is usually a single number, right? The SLO can be 20 different numbers. You can look at a lot of different metrics to define proxies for user value. And again, you usually design a system that allows you to look at multiple aspects. It's a great idea to have operational definitions. One of the things that happens a lot is that people define things differently. So even something like lead time or defects can have different definitions in different departments. Therefore, some people measure total number of defects they ever found. The other people measure the total number of defects in production. The other people measure the error rate in terms of exceptions. These people measure the error rate in terms of customer support calls. You then looking at completely different metrics for different people. And so what you want is operational definition, which means that you have very specific words and definitions in terms of what the metric means to everybody. At Ergonautic, we use the framework called AUTUM, Objective Decisions, Insights, Measurements. So we start from objective. So we don't start from the metric, right? We start from the objectives. What is it you're actually trying to achieve? Then, based on, given the objective, what decisions do we need to make? Given the need for decisions, what insights do we need to have to improve our ability to make these decisions? And then given the need for insights, what it is that we need to measure. So clearly you can see here that one objective can result in multiple metrics that you look at the same time. And so we have this kind of system that allows us to, when we help people define metrics, allows us to ask a number of questions, such as the metric type. I'm not going to dive into all of this, but sample rate, for instance, is really important. Are we talking about in real time? Are we talking about monthly? Report rates. Am I going to look and check in with this dashboard every day, or am I going to just look at it once a month? So it's really important in terms of our ability to gain insight from metrics, how we define them. And then, of course, SLI is service level indicator, which is the actual reliability. So SLA is the same exact definition as SLO, except this is a measure of how you're actually doing. So usually people start with SLOs. They start with, oh, I want 5 nines. Okay, do you know how many nines you have right now? Do you have 2? It's actually pretty common for people to have 2 nines. So what you actually want to start with is how you're doing. So when you are trying to implement this metrics from scratch, you actually start with SLIs. You define metrics and you put a lot of thought into how you define these metrics, right? But then you start measuring how you're doing, and you measure the current SLIs for a few months. And then you can say, okay, I'm this effective at what I do right now, and I want to be at a higher level of effectiveness. So I'm going to look into what my bottlenecks are for improving that effectiveness and to being better at what I do. So gradual improvement. Again, this is very DevOps. If knowledge was all it took, we'd all have 6-pack abs. The thing is, it takes work to implement it, and it takes stepping back and stopping to run around and continuously be in this cycle of reworking and continuously be in a cycle of having toil be the predominant part of your day, and actually focusing on how do we make things better. I like this quote: the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Somewhere there's someone doing the same type of work that you do smoothly and with very little amount of frustration. And our goal is to get everyone there where their work is maybe not completely toil-free, but a lot more satisfying and a lot more fun stuff, not fighting with your systems every day just to be able to deliver some kind of result. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you today, and I hope to hear from you again. You can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Sasha. Nice to see you here on the QA session. So for the audience, you still have time to put the questions there. I really loved how you were bringing all the elements of this track together by painting the bigger picture of DevOps. We had CI/CD, metrics, value streams, agile, state of DevOps, everything that we already had today. So big thank you.
I do feel like it's actually useful to bring things into context, right? We often kind of focus on the new insight and forget what we've done for the past 20 years. And it's kind of ends up being, you sometimes go to like the new conferences and people have the same insights we discussed 10 years ago. And I'm like, okay, clearly we just need to keep repeating the same message because we don't necessarily learn from each other.
Yeah, also what I love about your presentation about was the behavior aspect of humans, and also that we need humans because otherwise there will be chaos. And that's what we don't want. Sure. Usually we think about that we have a bunch of people, that's chaos, but that's not true. Like we need people to prevent the chaos, but organized people working in the best way.
So in the resilience community, there's also a lot of kind of research into that. Like, right, humans are what makes systems work and makes systems remain reliable. And like humans are part of that reliability. Yes, human error is a thing, and you can also like make mistakes. But if imagine flying an airplane without maintenance for 20 years, like, right? Like it's very clear that it's going to fall apart and you're going to stop trusting it. So kind of this is the same about every IT system that we put automation into.
Hi, we're from FECode, the driving force behind the DevOps conference.
Regardless of where you are on your DevOps journey, there's always the next step. With our experience in successful DevOps transformations, we're excited to support you in taking the next step.
Find us at fecode.com and have an amazing time watching the talks at the DevOps conference.